In this video, we'll be discussing the Biblical Sabbath. The command that Yahweh gave to all mankind is listed in the very first few pages of our Bible. That's given to us in Genesis chapter 2. Where after 6 days Yahweh made all the heavens and the earth and the seas and all that's in them. Yahweh rested from his work. He rested from his labor, from all his business. In Genesis chapter 2 we read, verse 1, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed and all their array. And in the seventh day Elohim completed his work, which he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made." Verse 3 says, "And Elohim blessed the seventh day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work which Elohim in creating had made." This verse 2 here has a phrase here, "he rested." That word rested comes from a word called Shabbat. That means to cease or to stop in Hebrew. That's where we get the name Shabbat, which is the seventh day weekly celebration that Yahweh has instructed his people to observe. So when you hear the name Shabbat, that's not just a name, it actually has a meaning. It means to stop, to cease from your work. And why do we do that? We do that because Yahweh stopped from his work, which he had done after he had created everything. The command is also given to us in the book of Exodus, much later on after this point. It's important to note at this point, at the start of creation, Yahweh only had created Adam. That was only one man whom Yahweh had made. At that point, there was no Israel. There was no other nation. Adam was one man. This command was therefore given to all mankind. It was not specifically to one particular nation or people. But much later down the track, when the nation of Israel had formed, Yahweh gave a command through Moses to the people of Israel. And you can find that in Exodus chapter 20. And that's what we call the fourth commandment. Exodus 20, starting in verse 8, Yahweh says, "Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart." He says remember to the people of Israel because he had created it right from the very beginning. That's the seventh day. It means bring it to mind, call it to mind. Remember the Sabbath day to set it apart. 6 days you labor and shall do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath. Again, that word Shabbat, to cease, is a Sabbath of Yahweh your Elohim. You do not do any work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth and the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart. Here we can see the same connection again, that the Sabbath is pointing back to that creation time where Yahweh had made everything and then rested. As we'll see through the remaining scriptures that we have, it's that the Sabbath and the creation account go hand in hand. They are inseparable. You cannot have them as distinct things. They go together. So that's the command here. We have 3 particular words that we should bring to our attention. The first thing is to remember, as we discussed, that's to call to mind, to remember that it was Yahweh who made the heavens and the earth. The next thing is to set it apart. That means to keep it holy, keep it distinct. In other words, those 6 days or the 6 days or any other day is separate to the seventh day. Yahweh made it set apart because he rested, he stopped working. And the final instruction we're given is we're not to do any work. This is the instruction that Yahweh has given about the Shabbat. Now we'll go and discuss 5 particular aspects of the Sabbath in a bit more detail. The first thing about the Sabbath is that it's a day of rest. Now, who is to rest? As we discussed, it's not just Israel, or it's not just Adam, it's for all mankind. Yahweh made the Sabbath for all mankind. Exodus 20 goes into great detail, goes to great lengths to explain that it is everyone. It says explicitly, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. In other words, the Sabbath is not just for human beings, it's also for animals. And if we keep in mind the context here of this Exodus, these were Israelites who were former slaves to the Egyptians. Yahweh said, unlike the Egyptians who mistreated you and made you work hard for all those years, Yahweh says, you don't treat your servants that particular way. You give them that rest that they deserve on the Shabbat. So we know that everyone is supposed to rest. Now, why do we need to rest? Well, we have to obey Yahweh's commandment and follow his example. You see, Yahweh from the very beginning rested. He's a spiritual being. He's not a physical being like us. We get tired after we do our work. But Yahweh, in making everything, it's not as if he got tired or he was fatigued that he needed to take a break or take a nap. Yahweh took that 7th day at the very beginning of time before any nation was born. He took that 7th day and he rested from his work to give us the example, to set us an example, much like a father would set an example for their children. So Yahweh set that example for us, even though he didn't need to rest, so that we would rest. And why would we need that rest? Because we are physical beings, and we need to have that break, which we need from our work and from our labor. The Sabbath rest is also for our good, as Deuteronomy chapter 32 says. 32 verse 47 says, these commands is not a worthless thing, it's for our own life. Now, talking about life, if we examine the course of our life, some might live 50, 60, 70, 80, or even 100 years. If we live 80 years, and you can do the maths, that would amount to 4,160 days of Shabbats. If we were to do 100 years of life, that would be 5,200 days. That would be in excess of 10 years of resting. When we put it that way, we don't actually think that we need that much rest. But Yahweh, who made us, who knows our bodies, says, you need that much rest. If we think about it another way, if we went without that rest, we would only experience our bodies going into a decline. We would be effectively cutting short our days. This commandment of the Sabbath is directly linked to our life. That's why we need the rest. Yahweh, who made us, knows that we need that rest. And in doing that, in keeping the Sabbath, we are extending our life. Now, an interesting verse is Leviticus chapter 19. Leviticus 19 is another set of instructions for us. And the very first instruction in Leviticus 19 verse 3 is this: each of you should fear his father and mother and guard my Sabbaths. I am Yahweh your Elohim. At face value, that seems like a very strange combination, to have fearing your father and mother and keeping the Sabbaths. That's the fourth and the fifth commandments put into one sentence. Why would Yahweh do that? Why did he say that? Well, the fourth commandment, as we said, is about the Sabbath. That is extending our life. It directly correlates with our lifespan. The fifth commandment is also correlating with our lifespan. You can read that fifth commandment in your own time, but what it says is that you are to honor your father and your mother so that your days are prolonged and that it will go well with you in the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you. In other words, these fourth and the fifth commands here are directly proportionate to our lives. They affect our lifespan. If we keep them, they will extend our life, and if we don't keep them, we will be cutting short our life. So that's the first point. The Sabbath is a day of rest, which is for our life and for our good. The second point is that the Sabbath is a celebration. In celebrating, what are we celebrating? We're celebrating Yahweh's achievements. To make the heavens and the earth and the seas and all that is in them, we haven't even discovered 1% of what Yahweh has made. But that was a huge accomplishment to achieve what he did in 6 days. And in doing that, we acknowledge that Yahweh is the creator. As it says in Jeremiah chapter 10, Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 12, he says, "He made the earth by his power, he established the world by his wisdom, and he has stretched out the heavens by his understanding." We also recall the Genesis account, the creation account, where at the end of the 6 days, at the onset of the Sabbath, that Friday evening, Yahweh looked at everything he made, and he saw that it was very good. He made man and saw that it was very good. And he himself was appreciating and acknowledging the effort and the achievements that he had made. So in keeping that Sabbath, we're celebrating Yahweh's achievements. And we're acknowledging him, that he is the creator. He is the father of all. He is the source of life. As it says in another scripture in Acts, it says, "By him we live, we breathe, we move, and have our being." Now, another verse is in Psalm 100. Psalm 100 is a song of celebration. I'll just open that up. Psalm 100 says, verse 3, "Know that Yahweh, he is Elohim. He has made us and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless him. Bless his name. For Yahweh is good." In keeping this Sabbath, we can rejoice and we can celebrate that Yahweh made us. If we don't keep the Sabbath, we're implying that Yahweh didn't make us, that we were formed by some natural processes or evolution or something else. By keeping the Sabbath, we are explicitly saying to Yahweh that he is our creator, and we're rejoicing in that. Now, another thing we should remember is that Yahweh didn't have to make us. He didn't have to make humankind, but he chose to make us. And we're celebrating the fact that we have that life, that we exist. And even if he didn't make humankind, it is a miracle that each of us individually, we exist. So we celebrate the Sabbath day because of our life, because of the life that Yahweh has given to us, and we acknowledge Yahweh that He is our Creator. And finally, we also celebrate the Sabbath because of our own achievements. Remember, the Sabbath is the seventh day, it's the end of the week. But it also marks the transition to the start of a new week. It's a good practice to start off the week when in the Sabbath to ask Yahweh for help. And then at the end of the week in the Sabbath to come back to Yahweh, to reflect on what He has given to you, what things you have achieved and accomplished. Much like Yahweh achieved many great things in the first 6 days, come back to Him and reflect and celebrate before Him what you've been able to achieve. The third point is that the Sabbath is a sign. The Sabbath is a sign for us that Yahweh is setting us apart. This is a key scripture in Exodus chapter 31. Exodus 31 is where Yahweh is talking to the children of Israel. And He's teaching them the Shabbat. Exodus 31, verse 13. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, And you speak to the children of Israel, saying, My Shabbat you are to guard by all means, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, to know that I, Yahweh, am setting you apart. In other words, this is a Sabbath for us. It's a sign between us and Yahweh that He is setting us apart. When it says set apart, it means Yahweh is keeping us distinct. Much like Yahweh made a distinction between the Egyptians and the Israelites, much like when Yahweh instructed the Israelites to put a blood on the lintels and on their doorposts, so that the angel would not destroy the Israelites. Yahweh made a mark, He made a sign. He gave them a sign to keep them separate from the other peoples, to keep them separate from death, so that they would have life. This Sabbath is a sign for Yahweh and us, to know that we are His and we are set apart from other people, and that we have a special place in His heart, in His eyes. So this Sabbath is a sign between us. And it's also a sign to know that Yahweh is our Elohim. In Ezekiel, in the book of Ezekiel chapter 20, Ezekiel 20, verse 20. We'll start in verse 19. I am Yahweh your Elohim. Walk in my laws and guard my right rulings, and do them, and set apart my Sabbaths, and they shall be a sign between me and you, to know that I am Yahweh your Elohim. By keeping the Sabbath, we acknowledge that Yahweh is our Elohim. By not keeping the Sabbath, we're also acknowledging that Yahweh is not our Elohim. The Sabbath is also a sign for others to identify us as Yahweh's children. Much like a child has character traits and attitudes similar to their parents, you can identify a child belongs to a parent by the way they might act. Maybe in small ways or big ways, but you can identify that. In the same way, in us keeping the Sabbath, we are making our identity known, that we are His children. We are Yahweh's children. And this sign is also a sign of something bigger to come. If we think about examples of signs in the Bible, we think about Moses was given a sign when he was in the wilderness looking after his father's sheep. Yahweh said to Moses, "This will be the sign for you, that you will come back and worship me at this mountain." Yahweh also gave signs to different people. He gave to Hezekiah when Hezekiah was being surrounded by armies. Yahweh said, you will eat this year and the next year and what springs up after that. That's going to be the sign for you. He gave signs to different people. A sign is a small symbol, a token of something bigger, something greater to come. This Sabbath is a weekly token. It's a symbol for us of the future rest that Yahweh has given to us. That's the future bigger rest that we get as our reward. Hebrews chapter 4 explains that in a lot more detail, but I won't go through that now. That talks about the future rest that we can look forward to, and that Sabbath is that rest for us, is that sign of that rest for us. The fourth point is that the Sabbath is a blessing. Now, many people might say, we can keep the Sabbath on any day we like, and if you wish, that's fine. But what Yahweh says is only one day was set apart. Only one day was blessed. So you might keep a Wednesday as your Sabbath, but the fact of the matter is that it is only the seventh day that was blessed. We read about that in Genesis chapter 2. Right from the very beginning, Yahweh blessed the Sabbath days, what it says. Genesis chapter 2, verse 3 says, and Elohim blessed the seventh day and set it apart, because on it he rested from all his work, which Elohim in creating had made. There is a blessing associated with keeping this day. If we keep it, we can get that blessing. If we don't keep it or we ignore it, we're missing out on that blessing. There are many other scriptures and prophecies which talk about the blessings and benefits of the Sabbath. Some of them are Isaiah 58, verse 13 to 14, Jeremiah 17, verse 19 to 27, Isaiah 56, verse 1 to 7. We won't go through all of them now. You can read them in your own time, and I would encourage you. They are very encouraging scriptures. But we'll focus on that last one. Have a read of Isaiah 56, verse 1 to 7. Thus said Yahweh, guard right ruling and do righteousness, for near is my deliverance to come, and my righteousness to be revealed. Blessed is the man who does this, and the Son of Man who becomes strong in it, guarding the Sabbath lest he profane it, and guarding his hand from doing any evil. And let not the son of the foreigner, notice this is the foreigner who has joined himself to Yahweh, speak, saying, Yahweh has certainly separated me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, look, I am a dry tree. For thus said Yahweh, to the eunuchs who guard my Sabbaths, and have chosen what pleases me, and are holding on to my covenant, to them I shall give in my house and within my walls a place and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I give them an everlasting name that is not cut off. Also the sons of the foreigner who join themselves to Yahweh, to serve him and to love the name of Yahweh, to be his servants, all who guard the Sabbath and not profane it, and are holding on to my covenant. Them I shall bring into my set-apart mountain, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their ascending offerings and their slaughterings are accepted on my slaughter place. For my house is called a house of prayer for all the peoples. These are tremendous blessings, but this particular scripture is particularly heartening for those of us who are not necessarily native Israelites. Yahweh is talking to foreigners in this particular scripture, that they who keep the Sabbaths, he's going to hold in really high esteem. He's going to treat them better than sons and daughters. That's a special blessing. That's a blessing that's not only applicable to Israelites, That's applicable to a foreigner, to anyone who has that heart to keep the Sabbath, to keep Yahweh's set-apart day. The fifth and final point is that the Sabbath is about healing, is a day for healing. There are many examples in the New Testament in the Gospels where Yahshua healed people specifically and explicitly on the Sabbath. He did that to illustrate that the Sabbath is a day for healing. There are many examples. There are about 7 examples that I could find. Mark chapter 3 verse 1, where Yahshua healed a man who had a withered hand. John chapter 9 verse 1, where he healed a man who was born blind. Luke 13, where he healed a crippled woman. Luke 14, where he healed a man with dropsy. Mark 1, where he healed a person with an unclean spirit. John 5, where he healed a lame man. And Mark 1, where he healed Simon Peter's own mother-in-law who was suffering from a fever. These are 7 instances where people were healed by Yahshua on the Sabbath. I'll bring out Luke chapter 13 in particular to illustrate this point. Luke 13, verse 10. And he was teaching in one of the congregations on the Sabbath. And see, there was a woman having a weakening spirit for 18 years, and was bent over and was unable to straighten up at all. And Yahshua, seeing her, called her near and said to her, Woman, you are loosened from your weakness. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was straightened up, and praised Elohim. But the ruler of the congregation, responding, much displeased that Yahshua had healed on the Sabbath, said to the crowd, There are 6 days on which men should work, and so come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath day. Then the master answered him and said, Hypocrite, does not each one of you on the Sabbath loosen his ox or his donkey from the stall, and lead it away to water it? And this one, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, look, for 18 years, should she not be loosened from this bond on the Sabbath? And when he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and all the crowd rejoiced for all the splendid works being done by him. Yahshua is saying, even animals get taken care of every day, including the Sabbath. How much more should the human beings who are afflicted or sick or ill, how much more should they experience that healing that comes from the Sabbath? Sabbath is not just for physical healing, but it's also spiritual healing, for our mind to relax, for our mind to remove itself from the physical stresses of this world and focus on Yahweh's word, to set our mind on things above, as it's written elsewhere. So these are 5 particular points that I wanted to draw out about the Sabbath. The first is that the Sabbath is a day of rest. It gives us life. It's also a celebration where we can celebrate ours and Yahweh's achievements. It's a sign for us, an intimate sign between us and Yahweh, also to other people, that we are his children. He is our Elohim, and he is setting us apart. The Sabbath is a blessing for us if we practice it and obey it. And it's also a profound day of healing.